In the name of God, the most merciful, the bestower of mercy, may God's peace and blessings be upon all the prophets and messengers. I would like to thank the Muslim Student Association, the Newman Club, the Office for Diversity and Inclusion, the Global Student Council, the Global Medical Brigades, and the Interfaith Center for the invitation to speak about the Prophet Muhammad and nonviolence. And when we speak about nonviolence, we think of great examples of nonviolence like Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi. However, tonight we're going to speak about someone who's not talked about much when it comes to nonviolence, and that is the Prophet Muhammad. And when we speak about the Prophet Muhammad, we're going to have to refer to the Quran. And the Quran is the book that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, and it is a book that has history, but it's not a history textbook. It has scientific facts, but it's not a science textbook. It has commandments, but it's not a book of commandments. It is eloquent, but it's not poetry. It's a book that has been formed to serve a purpose, and that purpose is for it to be a reminder. So, as a result, if we're going to take or quote verses of the Quran that are talking about history, it's going to be very important to not just pluck those verses out of the Quran and present them as standalone verses. What's important is to understand those historical verses in the historical context in which it was revealed. For example, something nothing to do with the Quran, but a more historical, more familiar historical story to all of us. When Paul Revere rode in Boston and said, "The British are coming," someone can take this statement, "The British are coming," and interpret it in many different ways. Someone can interpret it to mean the British are coming means that there are shiploads of immigrants coming from Britain that will be landing at our shores. Someone else could interpret it to mean that the British are coming means that Navy ships are now about to leave England and arrive at the 13 colonies to declare war. So there could be a number of interpretations of this single statement that's been plucked out of its context. But anyone who's familiar with the story knows that Paul Revere, when he said the British are coming, he didn't mean all British peoples. He didn't mean every single British person on the face of this earth. What he meant was those specific British troops that were there at Lexington that were marching forward. Similarly, when the Quran says, "Fight those who do not believe," this does not mean, now this is a historical verse. If we take it out of its context and out of its historical context, anyone could interpret it any way they like. But this verse similarly does not mean fight all those who don't believe in Islam, fight all those who don't believe in Islam anywhere or everywhere. In its historical context, it meant fight those particular Romans who killed and assassinated the ambassador of the Prophet Muhammad, and then threatened war to the second ambassador of the Prophet Muhammad, and then also committed other acts of aggression. Fight those that don't believe meant that specific group of Romans. And when we look into the story of Paul Revere, it becomes more clear to us that the British are coming doesn't mean every single English person. It meant those specific troops at Lexington. And when we look into the same story for this verse, that the Prophet Muhammad went to meet the Roman army, he passed by so many non-Muslim communities. So if the command was to fight those who don't believe in Islam, then why did the Prophet Muhammad leave so many non-Muslims without fighting them on the way to the Romans? And then while they're at Tabuk, this is why it was called the Battle of Tabuk, why did the Prophet Muhammad initiate on his own peace treaties with other Christian settlements? So when we understand the historical context, what may seem to be completely general and universal actually comes out to be something that was meant to be for a specific audience. Now, keeping this in mind, it's important to understand the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or peace and blessings of God be upon him, when we now go into his history to show that he was a great example for nonviolence. The Prophet Muhammad was born in Mecca over 1400 years ago. In Mecca, there's a house of worship called the Kaaba. You may have seen it. It's like the black box or black cube. This house of worship was originally built by Abraham and Ishmael. And they made this house of worship to be the worship for one God, the belief of monotheism. However, the descendants of Abraham and Ishmael over the centuries, over the years, added a little bit more to the monotheism. They added 360 idols. So the Kaaba, the house of worship that was dedicated and made for the worship of one God, the creator of the universe, had now 360 other idols there. The Prophet Muhammad got revelation, the Quran, just like Moses got the Torah and Jesus Christ got the gospel. And he started to preach monotheism. Now the ruling class of Arabia at that time, the pagans and the idolaters, were not happy with the concept of monotheism. These 360 idols brought pilgrims from all across Arabia, and then Mecca and this ruling class was able to host them. And the pilgrims will come and bring tributes and gifts and wealth, and it was good for trade, it was good for business. The ruling class really became very rich off of this whole concept. So when the Prophet Muhammad came and said, there's only one God, this was bad business. What it meant was taking away 360 idols that pulled pagans from all over Arabia, each idol attracting certain tribes and certain people, to replace them with just one God, the creator of the universe. This was going to cause problem for they would have to fold their business. So they started to discourage people from believing in monotheism. And as time went on, the idea of monotheism caught on. People wanted to worship one God. More of the pagans and idolaters were embracing Islam, and the ruling class escalated their efforts. Some of their children became Muslim, and they imprisoned their adult children in their own home, shackled them as a way to discourage them to be Muslim. This, however, did not make them recant their faith. And since this was not successful, they upped the ante. Then they started to imprison them. Then they started to torture them and punish them. They would take them out in the desert and force them to recant the belief of monotheism and to embrace the idols. They would place large rocks on their chests and force them to recant the belief of monotheism. But the early Muslims did not. And the opposite happened. More people embraced the concept of monotheism. Then the ruling class started to kill and torture more of the Muslims who were weak, to the point that it became unbearable that some of the Muslims, they migrated to Abyssinia to escape this persecution. And the ruling class was not satisfied with this migration. They went to Abyssinia to chase them and spoke to the king of Abyssinia to get them back, and they claimed that they were prisoners of war. The king of Abyssinia was not having any of it and did not give up those early Muslims. When they came back, the ruling class, the pagans, they were even more frustrated and they were more angered. And at this point, many of the Muslims had migrated to other cities, one of them in particular, which was Medina, which was to the north. And the Prophet Muhammad was amongst the few who were left behind in Mecca, dealing with this very harsh treatment from the idolaters. So since the Prophet Muhammad was amongst the few that was left behind, the pagans decided to assassinate the Prophet Muhammad. They sent many men with spears to break into his house on an appointed night, and each one would stab the Prophet Muhammad and kill them so that no tribe would be able to fight another tribe for the death of the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad, however, got news of this assassination plot, and he left before that night to migrate to Medina. Now, what was happening, this took place over a span of 10 years of persecution, torture, killings. And the early Muslims looked to the Prophet Muhammad and said, should we not retaliate? The response that the Prophet Muhammad gave was, I was commanded with forgiveness. Do not fight. The early Muslims in the Quran were commanded to be patient, to forgive, to overlook, to say words of peace. And this is exactly what they did for 10 years. And the result of this persistency and consistency with the values they believed in was that other people were watching, especially the people in Medina. Medina at this time was in a civil war where two factions were fighting each other. And now Mecca, as we mentioned, was a place of pilgrimage. So every year people from all around Arabia would come and hear about the developments and see the torture that was happening in the public. And that made them more curious. And they went to ask the Prophet Muhammad, what is this belief of monotheism? Who is Jesus Christ that you believe in? Who is Moses? Who is Abraham? And a lot of these idolaters would embrace monotheism and then go back to their towns and their cities and share what they have just embraced. And Medina was one of them, where now these two factions, amongst these two fighting factions in the civil war, there were members on both sides who had embraced Islam and embraced monotheism. And they started to think that we have a disastrous city that's been embroiled in war for many years. What if we invite the Prophet Muhammad to come to Medina, since he's known to be a peacemaker, since he's known to be nonviolent, since he's known to be patient, since he's known to have the title of being the truthful and the trustworthy? What if we invite him to Medina to help us solve our problems? So the Prophet Muhammad left before the assassination event happened and took to the road. When the pagans broke into his house, they could not find the Prophet Muhammad, and was told that someone saw him traveling on the road. The ruling class then announced a huge reward to whoever would bring back the Prophet Muhammad. So if the Muslims worshipped one God in Mecca, it was not good enough. If they went to Abyssinia, it was still a problem. If they went to Medina, it was still a problem. But the Prophet Muhammad was able, despite the search parties that went out, was able to reach Medina safely. When he arrived in Medina, the two factions that were warring against each other, his teachings of peace and nonviolence converted them from enemies to brothers and sisters. Medina became a place of peace. The settlements around Medina, there were Jewish tribes that settled around Medina to the north. The Prophet Muhammad went to them and initiated a peace treaty, that we are one nation and that we will protect each other. And the Jewish tribes signed those peace treaties. Just the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad brought peace, not just inside of Medina, but around Medina as well. The ruling class in Mecca was not happy. They felt they failed in assassinating the Prophet Muhammad. They sent war threats threats that they would attack Medina and that they would kill Muslims. So the Prophet Muhammad, in response, after 10 years of persecution, now the head of state of Medina, a natural action, if we study history, for a head of state that has gone through, or a group of people that has gone through 10 years of persecution, would be to declare war in Mecca and retaliate. But the Prophet Muhammad did not. Instead, he dispatched patrols around Medina due to the imminent threat to watch that if the Meccans or the pagans come, that they would be alert and be ready. And it so happened that the trading routes from Mecca to Syria passed by Medina. So the Prophet Muhammad had these patrols patrolling the caravans that would pass by to make sure that they would not attack Medina, which now the Prophet Muhammad was not just responsible for himself, but he was responsible for himself and his city and its inhabitants who were Muslims and non-Muslims, women and children. Mecca, who was itching for war, the ruling class, then used the trade routes as a pretext to declare war on Medina. They said, since our trade routes are so close to Medina, we're not comfortable with the Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims being close to our trade route. They can affect our trade to Syria at any time. Using that as a pretext, they sent out a battalion of 1,000 troops to attack a small patrol that was not aware of the battalion coming of 313 troops. This battalion of 1,000 meets them at the wells of Badr. They traveled and left Mecca to go all the way up towards Medina, and this is why the first battle is called the Battle of Badr. In this battle, 313 Muslim troops versus 1,000 of the pagans. It so happened that the Muslims got the victory of this battle. The Meccans went back to Mecca, and the Muslims went back to Medina. The pagans were upset. In 1 year, they increased their troops to 3,000 and came back for revenge. Now with 3,000 troops, they marched again, miles and miles to go up to Medina to meet the Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims. The Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims come out of Medina to defend their city. This time the pagans have 3,000 and the Muslims are only 700 in number. Both sides suffer heavy casualties. There's no clear victor to this battle. But at the end of the battle, the Muslims strategically retreated up a mountain. And the leader of the pagans, Abu Sufyan, calls out asking if Muhammad is still alive, because there were casualties on both sides. Realizing that the Prophet Muhammad was still alive at that spot, he announced that he will be back again for another war. So they left. The Prophet Muhammad could have attacked Mecca at this time. He did not. He chose not to be violent. In 2 years, Mecca was busy amassing troops. 3,000 was not enough. They went to other pagan tribes and convinced them to join them. This is why one of the names of this upcoming battle is called the Battle of the Confederates, because so many other tribes throughout Arabia joined in. They convinced them to join them to attack Medina. They even convinced some of the Jewish tribes to play along as well and provide logistical support and weapons to attack Medina. 10,000 troops now marched outside of Medina. The inhabitants of Medina, all the women, children, troops, and everybody is approximately 3,000. There's no way the Muslims can face an army of 10,000 troops. They don't even go out to defend the city. The numbers don't make sense. What do? They dig a wide trench and a deep trench around the city. Can you imagine? People who are trying to stay alive are digging a huge trench around their city to protect their women and their children, their wives and their families. only because they worship one God. 10,000 troops, when they come, they find this surprise, this huge trench. They can't cross it with their horses. They can't jump over it. They station outside of Medina. The siege lasts for 30 days until the Confederates start developing mistrust with each other. And then weather conditions become so severe in the desert that they're unable to continue their attack, and after 30 days they pack up and they leave. Now, we're talking about 15 years of aggression. And yet the Prophet Muhammad never launched an attack on Mecca. Nor did he ever command any patrol to go out and raid any caravan. The next year, the Prophet Muhammad, with a group of Muslims, traveled to Mecca. But they traveled to Mecca for pilgrimage. Dressed in the pilgrimage garb, unarmed. They travel to go down to Mecca. This was the symbol, the message of the Prophet Muhammad to the Meccans: enough of war, enough of hostilities. We haven't never attacked you once. You've attacked us many times. The last time had almost the whole of Arabia attacking us. It led to nothing. Let's move on with life. We're here to worship. We're here in a pilgrim's garb. And not only that, it's been years now that the Muslims did not see their homes, did not see their families and their relatives, who were still pagans, some of them, but yet they wanted to see them. Those who supported their conversion to Islam. But the pagans came out of Mecca and stopped the group of pilgrims and said, "You're not allowed to enter into Mecca this year. But next year you could come back." So the Prophet Muhammad then used this as an opportunity to negotiate more peace. He told them that it was okay that they would withdraw and go back this year, but he offered them to sign a peace treaty. The pagans said, "Sure, but it's going to be on our terms and conditions." Well, what are those terms and conditions? They wrote up the terms and conditions and presented it to the Prophet Muhammad. The Muslims read the terms and conditions and were shocked. A complete, one-sided peace treaty, completely favoring the pagans. The Muslims were upset and did not want to sign this peace treaty. The Prophet Muhammad commanded for the peace treaty to be signed. His message was that the preference of peace must prevail over unfavorable terms and conditions of a treaty. Peace was more important to the Prophet Muhammad. The peace was signed for 10 years, that there will be peace. So peace was established. Now, some people refer to the battles that the Prophet Muhammad fought, and all of them here were in defense, and say that since the Prophet Muhammad fought those battles, he violated nonviolence. Self-defense and self-preservation is not a violation of nonviolence. Gandhi himself said, "When there is only a choice between cowardice and violence, I would advise violence." This is because Gandhi understood that self-defense is not a violation of nonviolence. And the Quran is very clear on this. The Quran, there's no mystery. The Quran tells us exactly when it's permissible to fight, who to fight, and when to fight. The Quran, when the Muslims were being persecuted, when the Muslims were being attacked in Medina, the Quran said, "Fight those who are fighting you." In other words, if there's a peaceful nation and they're not being belligerent, it's not permissible to attack them or fight them. Then the Quran also said, if they remove themselves from you and do not fight you and offer you peace, then God does not give you a cause to fight them. There's no reason to fight if no one is fighting. So Islam forbids fighting for conquests and wealth and land and colonialism and imperialism. And then the Quran also says, if they incline to peace, then you should incline to it as well. And the word here is not if they offer peace, meaning if the belligerent party gives some hints, some inclination to peace, the Muslims must cater to that inclination and match it. And the Prophet Muhammad throughout his life followed this to the highest degree. On one journey with his companions, they stopped at a certain location to rest. The Prophet Muhammad slept under a tree. When he opened his eyes, he saw a pagan standing in front of him who was holding a sword above his head, ready to strike him. The Prophet Muhammad caught, unprepared. Weapons are away. They were just sleeping, just taking a rest. And the pagan says to him, "Who will save you from me now?" The Prophet Muhammad, after opening his eyes, looked at him and calmly said one word. He said, "God." This unexpected response made the pagan tremble and drop his sword. By this time, the other companions got up and grabbed that pagan. Now I ask you, this was an assassination attempt. What would any head of state do today? What would any king or head of state or emperor do at that time? What did the Prophet Muhammad do? He forgave him and he let him go. The Battle of Uhud, where there was casualties on both sides, the Prophet Muhammad was in battle. A person just struck a sword on his shoulder. Another strike came, hit his helmet. The metal piece pierced into his cheek. He is bleeding profusely. Volleys of arrows are being shot at him. People are marching forward to kill him. What does the Prophet Muhammad say at this moment, standing in battle? He says, "O God, forgive them, for they do not know." This is what the Prophet Muhammad is saying to people who want him dead, who want him dead on the spot, who've hit him and struck him. This is one of the highest degrees of nonviolence. The 10-year peace treaty, unfortunately, didn't last for 10 years. After only 2 years, the pagans attacked a Muslim tribe and killed many of them. They violated the peace treaty. Usually, in that time and today, if a peace treaty is violated, that's a cause for war. Did the Prophet Muhammad attack Mecca? He didn't. Instead, he spoke to the pagans and said, "Pay blood money to compensate for the murders." The pagan said, "Screw you." Then the Prophet Muhammad gave them another option and said, "Well, you broke the peace treaty, let's renew it." They said, "No, we want to fight you." So the Prophet Muhammad, this is 18 years now. After 18 years of dealing with their aggression, he leaves Medina with 10,000 troops and comes at the doorsteps of Mecca. And something comes to their realization as they come to the doorsteps of Mecca. They realize that with 10,000 troops, they can crush this city. One of the flag bearers sees this condition and realizes that they can just mow down the city at this point. And he announces, he says, "Today is a day of slaughter." The Prophet Muhammad stops the march, turns to this man, deposes him, and then announces, "Today is a day of mercy." Then the Prophet Muhammad enters Mecca, enters the gates, and then he announces to the inhabitants of Mecca and says, whoever enters the house of Abu Sufyan, the leader of the pagans, will be safe. Whoever lays down their arms will be safe. Whoever locks their doors will be safe. There was no pillage. There was no destruction. No prisoners of war were taken. Amnesty was given. Forgiveness was implemented. And mercy was seen. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi did not have an army at their disposal. But the Prophet Muhammad did. At any time, he could have commanded an attack, and his faithful followers would have launched forward. But there isn't a single incident in the history of the Prophet Muhammad where he ever attacked a nation, or there were no nations back then. He never ever attacked a community or a city that was peaceful. Any battle or any fight that happened was in response to aggression. And that response to aggression was only after the Prophet Muhammad was patient, gave them options for peace, and exhausted all measures of diplomacy, as we saw 18 years, and only then he would set out forth to neutralize this threat in self-defense and self-preservation. So the Prophet Muhammad did have this army. He did have the power to attack. He did have the power to launch raids all across Arabia and plunder. He did have the power to crush cities, but he did not. And that makes him the greatest example for nonviolence. Because when you have the power to crush and you don't, you are the example for nonviolence. And a greater example for nonviolence than one who does not have the power or does not have an army. And just to show you how complicated it was, who are we talking about? What situations and people are we talking about? The code of chivalry in Arabia with the Muslims and non-Muslims, because there were Jewish Arabs, Christian Arabs, they're all Arabs. They were living in Arabia. Was very strong. Their sense of honor was exaggerated. If a person from tribe A killed a person from tribe B, tribe B would go to tribe A and make sure they killed at least 10 people to avenge that murder. Tribe A would respond by making sure they killed at least 20 people of tribe B. And this way, tribal wars continued for decades because of one murder. These were the people the Prophet Muhammad was dealing with. But he transformed these people who are ready to bring out a sword and fight at any moment into a people who restrained themselves for over a decade and did not fight, did not commit acts of aggression. So not only did the Prophet Muhammad have an army in his disposal, but he converted these people into people who were nonviolent. How? How was he able to do that? And the secret is in the Quran. God told Prophet Muhammad, "Be upright as you have been commanded." Being upright means being consistent with your values. The Prophet Muhammad, from day one to his last day, he was consistent with his values. No aggression, no amount of emotions, if they were soaring amongst the people, emotions of revenge. No actions of others ever made him change his values. He stuck to his values. And the Prophet Muhammad then taught this to his followers. And he said, "Say, I believe in God and be upright, meaning your belief in God should be the motivation for you to be consistent with your values. And if you're a true believer in God, you can never fall into extremism because you will be consistent with your values. So when people of hate and terror make us change our values, they win. When we are consistent with our values throughout time, we win. And the Prophet Muhammad was consistent with his values of peace, mercy, and justice, such that he left behind an amazing legacy of nonviolence that every one of us could follow. Thank you very much.